The sound of crystal shattering is distinct. It is sharp, final, and in a room designed for reverent silence. Then came the smell. Damp earth, violets, and the heavy metallic tang of a 1982 Chateau Margaux soaking into the cream-colored carpet. $5,000 of history, destroyed in a single heartbeat. I stood there, frozen, while the crimson stain expanded toward the polished shoes of the master judge. Kaya Green didn't flinch. She didn't yell. She just looked at me, and the air between us shifted instantly, from professional ruin to something far more dangerous. To understand why my hand slipped, you have to understand the exhaustion living deep in my bones. I wasn't one of the legacy candidates, with a family vineyard in Napa and a trust fund to cover the tuition. I was the scholarship hire, the outsider who worked double shifts at a bistro downtown just to afford the textbooks. My palate was my only currency. I had trained it until I could distinguish slate from limestone in a blind tasting. But I couldn't train my body to survive on 3 hours of sleep for weeks on end. The Green Institute was the pinnacle of this world. It was sterile, luxurious, and terrifying. The tasting room, the Grand Cru suite, felt less like a classroom and more like an operating theater, where we were the patients, etherized upon the table. The executives lined the back wall like sharks in Italian suits. They weren't just watching. They were calculating the return on investment for the scholarship program. They were waiting for blood. And at the head of the table sat Kaya Green. In the industry, they called her the palate. She was a master sommelier before 30, a woman who could dismantle a vintage with a single sentence and a career with a single glance. Her presence was heavy. It demanded perfection. When she looked at you, it felt like she was reading the sediment in your soul, stripping away the pretense until only the truth remained. She wore a charcoal suit that fit with architectural precision, her hair pulled back, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. She was beautiful in the way a storm front is beautiful. Powerful, distant, and capable of devastation. I was presenting the bottle. The decanting cradle was heavy silver, cold against my skin. I remember the specific texture of the glass, cool, smooth, unforgiving. I felt the tremor start in my shoulder first. Just a small spasm of fatigue, a rebellion of the nerves. I tried to correct it, to tighten my grip, to force my body into submission, but my muscles betrayed me. The bottle slipped. It wasn't a clumsy fumble, it was a surrender to gravity. The glass shattered instantly, and the dark, ruby liquid splashed against the white cuffs of my uniform, marking me. The silence that followed was physical. It pressed against my eardrums, thick and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the climate control system. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from the sharks in the back. I waited for the screaming. I waited for security to escort me out. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt too loud in the quiet room. I looked down at my hands. They were stained red, trembling violently now. It was over. Everything I had worked for, every late night, every sacrifice, gone in a puddle of wasted wine. The smell was overwhelming now, the rich bouquet of the vintage mocking me with its complexity. Then the chair scraped against the floor. Kaya stood up. She moved with a terrifying grace, slow and deliberate. She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the hardwood before silencing on the ruined carpet. She stopped inches from the mess, ignoring the wine threatening the hem of her trousers. She didn't look at the executives. She didn't look at the shattered glass. She looked at me. Her gaze was unflinching, steel gray and impossible to read. The executives started to murmur, sensing the kill. One of them, a man with a thick gold watch and too much cologne, stepped forward to intervene, to apologize for my incompetence. "Kaya," he started, his voice dripping with false concern, "we'll handle this immediately." Kaya cut him off without turning her head. "Everyone out," she said. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The man paused, confused. "Excuse me?" I said out. She turned then, fixing him with a look that could freeze a vintage. "Clear the room. Now." The shuffle of feet was immediate, Briefcases snapped shut. The heavy oak doors opened and closed, swallowing the murmurs of the board members. The latch clicked. The sound echoed. And then we were alone. Just me, the wreckage of my career, and the woman who held my future in her hands. The air thickened, charged with a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The silence that followed the latch clicking shut was heavier than the crash had been. I stood amidst the wreckage of $5,000 worth of wine, the red stain creeping across the carpet like a slow arterial bleed. I waited for the axe to fall. I expected a dismissal, cold and efficient, delivered with the same detachment one uses to discard a broken glass. Instead, Kaya Green stepped closer. Her heels sank slightly into the plush wool, ignoring the burgundy pool spreading dangerously near her shoes. She didn't look at the mess. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing with a focus that felt less like judgment and more like a dissection. "Describe it," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a texture to it. Rough silk over steel. I blinked, my hands still shaking at my sides, stained crimson. I'm sorry, Miss Green. I'll get the cleaning crew immediately. I can try to pay for the bottle somehow. I didn't ask for an apology," she cut in, her voice dropping an octave, vibrating in the quiet room. "I asked you to describe the wine on the floor. Before you dropped it, you hesitated. I saw it. Your hand locked up. The muscle in your forearm twitched. Why?" My heart hammered against my ribs. She had seen the hesitation. She thought it was fear. And it was, partially. But it was something else, too. Something I hadn't dared to say in front of the board, because contradicting the inventory of the Green Institute was professional suicide. But I had nothing left to lose now. I was already ruined. "It was off," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. Kaya didn't blink. She didn't scold. She just tilted her head, a predator hearing a twig snap in the distance. "Be specific." "The nose," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength, grounded by the only thing I knew was true, my senses. Under the violets, under the fruit and the oak, there was damp cardboard, wet newspaper in a basement. It was faint, maybe 2 parts per trillion, but it was there, cutting through the structure. I looked down at the expensive ruin at my feet. Trichloroanisole, cork taint. The silence returned, stretching thin. I braced myself. I had just accused a legendary vintage, selected by the master herself, of being flawed. Kaya moved then. She crouched down, disregarding the cost of her charcoal suit, and dipped a single manicured finger into the spilled wine on the carpet. She brought it to her nose, inhaled deeply, and then, impossibly, she smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was sharp, dangerous. The look of someone finding a weapon they'd been searching for. "Correct," she said, standing up and wiping her hand on a linen napkin she pulled from her pocket. I stared at her, the adrenaline leaving me dizzy. You knew?" "Of course I knew," she said, tossing the stained napkin onto the table. "I selected that bottle specifically because it was corked. I wanted to see who in that room of expensive suits and inflated egos would have the courage to send it back." She took a step toward me, invading my personal space. The scent of her, sandalwood and something cool like rain, mixed with the heavy fumes of the wine. None of them noticed. They were too busy looking at the label, too busy calculating the price. She stopped inches from me. "But you noticed. You hesitated." "I dropped it," I reminded her, the shame still burning my cheeks. "You dropped it because you were fighting your instincts," she corrected. "Your body knew the wine was wrong before your brain allowed you to admit it. That tension caused the tremor. The crash was a failure of nerves, yes. But the hesitation? That was a triumph of palate." She walked around me, circling like I was a specimen under glass. "You have raw talent. Unrefined, undisciplined, but undeniable. Most people in this building couldn't smell smoke in a burning house if the label didn't tell them to." She stopped behind me, her voice close to my ear. "I don't need another technician. I have plenty of those. I need someone who feels the wine." I turned to face her, hope warring with terror. "So, I'm not fired?" "That depends," she said, her expression hardening again. "You owe me $5,000. My stomach dropped. I don't have that kind of money. I can barely make rent. Not in cash, she said dismissively. In labor. In time. You're going to work it off. I'll do anything, I said quickly. I'll scrub the cellars, I'll organize the inventory, You won't be scrubbing, she interrupted. You'll be tasting. You'll be learning. You are going to become my personal project. But be warned, this isn't a gift. It's a sentence. Her eyes bored into mine, stripping away any defenses I had left. You will be at the Institute every morning at 0400. You will stay until I tell you to leave. You will taste until your tongue is numb and describe texture until your vocabulary bleeds. No sleep, no excuses, just the pursuit of absolute perfection. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. If you waste my time, if you ever drop another bottle, I won't just fire you. I will ensure you never pour a glass of water in this city again. Do we have an understanding? Yes, I breathed, the air thick between us. Yes, Miss Green. Kaya, she corrected, her gaze lingering on my mouth for a fraction of a second too long. When we are in the dark, it's Kaya. She turned her back to me. Get out. Be here at 0400. I walked out of the Grand Cru suite, my legs feeling like jelly. I passed the empty boardroom chairs, past the reception desk where the staff looked at me with pity, assuming I was packing my box. I stepped out into the cool evening air of the city, the glass doors sliding shut behind me. I looked down at my hands. They were still stained red, but they weren't shaking anymore. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of exhaust and rain, but underneath it, I could still smell the ghost of the wine. And something else. The scent of danger. I had walked into that room a student, and I had walked out something else. Something owned. The cellar of the Green Institute was a world beneath the world. While the city above slept, wrapped in the gray fog of 4 a.m., I descended into the earth. The air down there was different, kept at a constant 55 degrees, heavy with the smell of damp limestone and aging oak. It was a subterranean cathedral of silence, where the only sound was the hum of the cooling units and the rhythmic click of Kaya's heels on the concrete floor. This became my reality. There was only the darkness, the candle flame, and Kaya. She didn't teach like the professors in the upstairs classrooms. There were no textbooks, no flavor wheels, no memorizing rapid-fire facts about soil pH levels in the Loire Valley. Kaya stripped all of that away. She wanted to dismantle the academic armor I had built around my senses. We would stand for hours over a single glass, the red liquid almost black in the low light. "Stop thinking," she would command, her voice low, bouncing softly off the curved ceiling. "You're analyzing the wine like an accountant. You're looking for the balance sheet. I want you to find the pulse." She taught me that texture was a language more honest than flavor. We spent 3 consecutive nights just understanding grip. I remember standing there, swirling a young Barolo that was tight and aggressive. I started to list the tasting notes, tar, rosés, cherry, but she stopped me with a sharp gesture of her hand. "Forget the fruit," she said, stepping into my personal space. The cellar was narrow, the aisles between the racks tight. When she moved, I felt the displacement of the air. Focus on the structure. Where does it sit on your tongue? How does it hold you? "It's drying," I stammered, acutely aware of how close she was. "High tannins. Astringent." "No," she corrected, her eyes locking onto mine. "It has tension. It resists you. Feel the way it grabs the sides of your palate? That isn't dryness, Emily. That is grip. It's the wine demanding your attention. It's refusing to let go." She took the glass from my hand, her fingers brushing against mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt through me that had nothing to do with the caffeine I was living on. She took a sip, her eyes closing for a moment, and I found myself watching the column of her throat, the way her lips moved against the rim of the glass. It was intimate in a way that felt illicit. We were sharing the same fluids, breathing the same recycled air, isolated from the rest of the human race. The work was grueling, but the proximity was dangerous. One night, we were inspecting sediment in a vintage port. The only light came from a single candle. To see the particulate matter properly, you have to hold the neck of the bottle directly against the flame's light, peering through the dark glass. It requires steadiness. It requires closeness. Kaya stood behind me to guide my angle. Her chest brushed against my back, a ghost of a touch that made my hands tremble. "Steady," she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. "Don't look at the flame. Look through it. Find the shadow in the liquid." I could smell her perfume, cool and distinct, overpowering the sweet, heavy scent of the port. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I was terrified she could feel it through the thin fabric of my shirt. "I see it," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Good," she murmured. She didn't pull away immediately. For a second, we just stood there, suspended in the amber glow of the candlelight, her body shielding mine from the dark. The line between mentor and student felt paper-thin, ready to tear with the slightest movement. It was in those quiet hours that I saw the cracks in her armor. The iron palate wasn't a machine. She was a woman who was just as exhausted as I was. There were moments, usually around 6 a.m., when the world upstairs was starting to wake, that she would lean against the tasting table, pinching the bridge of her nose. We would share a silent coffee, the steam rising between us, and she would drop the mask. She would talk about the pressure of the institute, the weight of the legacy she was carrying. She never complained, but she let me see the fatigue. "You have a good palate, Emily," she said once, her voice rough with tiredness, looking at me with a softness that made my chest ache. "Don't let this place ruin it. Don't let them turn you into stone." "I won't," I promised. But the truth was, I wasn't afraid of the institute anymore. I was afraid of the magnetic pull in the center of the cellar. I was afraid that in learning to feel the wine, I was starting to feel too much for the woman teaching me. I was falling in love with the dark, and with the only other person who lived in it. The wine was just the medium. The real lesson was happening in the silence between us. The annual Grand Tasting Gala was the Institute's high mass, a black-tie convergence of every major collector, critic, and producer on the West Coast. For the staff, it was a war zone of logistics. For me, it was the final exam. Kaya decided that I wasn't just going to be pouring water in the background. I was going to be visually vetting the blind flight for the VIP table. It was a task usually reserved for senior instructors, a test of trust that terrified me more than the initial crash ever had. We moved our sessions from the subterranean safety of the cellar to the library on the top floor, a room of dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights. The setup was brutal. Kaya used opaque black glasses, stripping away the visual cues of color and viscosity. I couldn't see if the wine was the pale straw of a young Chablis or the deep gold of an aged Sauterne. I was blind, left with only my nose and the tactile memory of my tongue. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the city far below and the rustle of Kaya's silk blouse as she circled the table. She was a shark in the water, moving with a predatory grace that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Don't guess," she murmured, her voice coming from directly behind my left shoulder. "You are searching for a label in your memory. Stop it. Listen to the wine." I swirled the black glass, the liquid sloshing unseen against the crystal. I lowered my nose to the rim, closing my eyes to shut out the distraction of her proximity. The scent hit me, a confusing, chaotic mix of bruised apple, wet wool, and something sharp, like crushed seashells. It was contradictory. It smelled old, but felt vibrant. "It's nervous," I said, struggling to find the word. "High acid. It's vibrating. But the nose is oxidized. It smells like a mistake, but the texture is deliberate." Kaya stepped closer. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a warm front colliding with the cool air of the library. "Go deeper," she whispered. "Where does it take you? Is it the sun-baked earth of Spain? The slate of Germany?" I took a sip, letting the liquid coat my palate. It was dry, bone dry, but rich with the ghost of honey. It had a texture like lanolin, waxy, coating, heavy yet pierced by that laser-focused acidity. It was a paradox. "Chenin Blanc," I breathed, the realization blooming in my chest. It has to be. The wool notes, the quince. I paused, searching for the vintage. It had the weight of age, the settled confidence of time. Loire Valley, Vouvray, Clos du Bourg, 1990? The silence stretched for a heartbeat, 2, 3. I waited for the correction, for the cold dissection of my failure. Open your eyes, Kaya said softly. I opened them. She was standing right in front of me, leaning against the edge of the heavy table, her face level with mine. She wasn't looking at the glass. She was looking at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. Gaston Hewitt, 1990, she confirmed. A perfect read. The relief was a physical rush, dizzying and sweet. I got it right? You didn't just get it right, Emily. You understood it. She reached out then. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Her hand came up to my face, her cool fingers brushing a stray lock of hair away from my temple. The touch was electric, a sudden, shocking circuit closing between us. It wasn't the touch of a mentor correcting a student. It was precise, claiming, and terrifyingly intimate. Her hand didn't retreat. It lingered, her thumb resting against the pulse point of my jaw. I froze, trapping the air in my lungs. The professional distance we had maintained, the rigid hierarchy of master and apprentice, evaporated in the heat of that contact. My heart was hammering against her fingertips, betraying me, confessing everything I hadn't dared to say. Kaya's gaze dropped to my lips, then back up to my eyes. Her pupils were blown wide, swallowing the gray. You have a gift, she whispered, and I wasn't sure if she was talking about the wine anymore. She leaned in. The movement was microscopic, a gravitational pull that drew us together until I could feel the warmth of her breath on my mouth. Her scent was overwhelming, drowning out the Vouvray. I leaned forward to meet her, my eyelids fluttering shut, the world narrowing down to the space between us. Then, the library door handle rattled. We sprang apart as if a gun had gone off. Kaya spun toward the window, her posture instantly rigid, her hands clasping behind her back. I grabbed the edge of the table, my knuckles white, fighting to steady my breathing. The door swung open, and the night cleaning crew pushed a heavy cart into the room, the wheels squeaking on the parquet floor. "Oh, sorry, Ms. Green," the man stammered, freezing in the doorway. "I didn't think anyone was up here." "It's fine," Kaya said, her voice clipped and cold, sounding a million miles away. We were just finishing. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. But as I gathered the black glasses, my hands trembling again for the first time in weeks, I knew the truth. The wine on the carpet hadn't been the accident. This was. And there was no cleaning crew in the world that could scrub away what had just happened. The stakes had shifted violently. I wasn't fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for her. The spell of the library was broken by the sharp intrusion of reality. The Institute, once a sanctuary, transformed into a panopticon. I felt eyes on me everywhere. Conversations died when I walked past tasting stations, replaced by the rustle of papers. The intimacy Kaya and I had cultivated in the dark was leaking out, twisted into something ugly by the daylight. The architect of this misery was Marcus Van Doren. Marcus was the heir apparent, a man whose family name was on half the vineyards in Napa. He was technically brilliant, but lacked soul. He treated wine like a math problem, not a living thing. And he hated that the scholarship girl who dropped a bottle of Margaux was suddenly the master's shadow. He cornered me in the stemware room, blocking the exit while I polished Bordeaux glasses. "You're very dedicated lately," Marcus said, his voice smooth and venomous. "Kaya must be an exhausting teacher. I know she demands excellence. I didn't know she required sleepovers." I froze, the glass fragile in my hand. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence. The 4 a.m. sessions, the private access, the way she looks at you." He stepped closer, invading my space with the scent of expensive cologne. "It's a bold strategy. Most of us try to earn the pin with our noses. You're trying to earn it on your knees." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It preyed on my deepest insecurity, that I was a fraud who survived only because of Kaya's favor. "Get out of my way," I whispered, pushing past him. "Enjoy it while it lasts," he called out. "The board is watching. Kaya Green doesn't protect liabilities. She cuts them loose." I retreated into myself. For the next week, I became a machine. I arrived at the cellar precisely on time and left the second our session ended. I kept my eyes on the floor, stopping all questions about texture and grip. I built a wall of professional ice between us, terrified Marcus was right, that I was ruining her. Kaya tolerated the silence for 4 days. On the 5th, she snapped. "Enough," she said. We were in her office, the glass walls exposing us to the high noon sun. "You've been acting like a kick dog all week. The fire is gone. Why?" "I'm focusing on the curriculum," I lied. "Lying is an insult to my intelligence," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Is this about the whispers? Is this about Marcus?" I looked up, eyes burning. "They say I'm sleeping my way to the top. They say I'm a fraud. And if they think that about me, what do they think about you? I'm dragging you down." Kaya stood up. She didn't come around the desk to comfort me. She stayed behind it, a fortress of authority. "Let them talk. Sheep always bleat when they see a wolf." Her eyes blazed with a protective anger that took my breath away. "Marcus is angry because he spent 10 years memorizing what you understand by instinct. He is a technician. You are an artist. I don't waste time on charity cases, Emily. I don't invest in people because I like their eyes. I invest because they have the potential to be better than I am." She placed her hands flat on the desk. "You are not a liability. You are the future of this institute, and I will not let a trust fund boy with a mediocre palate dictate how I train my successor. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered, the shame dissolving under the heat of her conviction. "Good. Now get back to work. We have a reputation to uphold." The summons arrived on cream-colored cardstock, heavy and formal, sliding under the door of the tasting room like a death warrant. An emergency session of the board of directors. Subject, the integrity of the mentorship program. I knew what it meant. Marcus had played his hand. He had taken his whispers and turned them into a weapon, forcing the institute to choose between its reputation and its prodigy. Walking back into the Grand Cru suite felt like walking into a recurring nightmare. The carpet had been replaced, the stain of the 1982 Margot erased, but the memory of the crash still vibrated in the air. The same executives lined the walls, their faces grim. Marcus stood near the window, feigning a look of somber concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. And at the head of the table sat Kaya. She looked immovable, a statue carved from ice and obsidian, staring down the chairman, who was mid-lecture. "The Institute cannot afford the appearance of impropriety," the chairman was saying, his voice smooth and oily. "The rumors regarding your special attention to this candidate are distracting. To protect the green legacy, we believe it is best to terminate the mentorship. Ms. Vance can be reassigned to the entry-level program. Or released." It was a polite way of saying they wanted to bury me. Kaya didn't blink. She waited for the silence to settle, letting the weight of their cowardice fill the room. "You question my judgment," she stated. It wasn't a question. "You believe I am compromising the standards of this institution for personal reasons." "We believe appearances matter," the chairman replied. "Appearances are for amateurs," Kaya snapped, standing up. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Results matter. You think I am favoring her? You think she is here because I enjoy her company? You are mistaken. She is here because she can do things none of you can." She gestured to the side table where a bottle sat, crusted in decades of cellar dust. It was a 1945 Chateau Mouton Rothschild. A legend. A ghost. A bottle worth more than my entire life's earnings. "Test her," Kaya challenged. "Right now. Live service. If she fails, if she spills a drop, if she misidentifies a single note, if she breaks the cork, she is gone, and I will resign as head of instruction." The room gasped. Even Marcus looked pale. Kaya was betting her entire career on my hands. "But," Kaya continued, her voice turning razor sharp, "if she succeeds, Marcus leaves. Immediately. For wasting my time with petty jealousy." The chairman looked at Marcus, then at Kaya. The gamble was too rich to refuse. "Agreed." Kaya turned to me. Her eyes were fierce, communicating a silent command. "Do not fail me. Decant it. You have 5 minutes." I stepped forward. The fear that had paralyzed me months ago was gone, burned away by hundreds of hours in the dark. I didn't see the board. I didn't see Marcus. I saw the bottle. I reached for the cradle, my movements fluid. I was no longer the exhausted girl who dropped the wine. I was the instrument Kaya had tuned. I lit the candle. The flame flickered, casting a long shadow against the mahogany. I cut the foil. The cork was ancient, a crumbling plug of cork that had held its breath since the end of the Second World War. I inserted the worm, applying torque with surgical precision. I felt the cork give, a soft sigh of history being released. I drew it out in one smooth motion. Intact. Now came the pour. I lifted the bottle, tilting it over the decanter. The neck hovered over the candle flame. I watched the shoulder of the bottle, looking for the sediment, the heavy silt of tannins that would ruin the wine if they slipped through. The liquid was dark, opaque, heavy. I poured. The stream was steady, a ribbon of black silk. The room was dead silent. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. I wasn't thinking. I was feeling. I felt the weight of the glass, the shift of the liquid, the heat of the flame. I watched the light shine through the neck, waiting for the dark cloud of sediment. There. I stopped the pour instantly, catching the dregs before they could escape. I swirled the decanter, aerating the vintage, and poured a single taste into the chairman's glass. I stepped back, hands clasped behind my back, perfectly still. The chairman lifted the glass. He swirled, sniffed, and sipped. He paused, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at Marcus. "It is flawless," the chairman admitted, his voice quiet. "Absolutely free of sediment. The wine is alive." Kaya didn't smile. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the only approval that mattered. We had won. Marcus was already packing his briefcase, unable to meet my gaze. I had walked into the room a liability, and I stood there now as the undeniable proof of Kaya Green's genius. The career was safe. But as I looked at Kaya, I knew the real danger was just beginning. The adrenaline crash is always worse than the fatigue. After the board members filed out, offering stiff nods and murmurs of impressive work, the energy in the room evaporated, leaving behind a vacuum that felt dangerously fragile. We walked back to Kaya's office in silence, the click of our heels echoing in the empty hallway. It felt like a victory march, but it also felt like a funeral procession. We had won. Marcus was gone. My job was safe. Kaya's reputation was unblemished. But as the heavy glass door of her office clicked shut, sealing us in, I realized the victory was hollow. Kaya didn't sit behind her desk. She walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline that was just starting to bruise with twilight. She looked exhausted, her posture slumping slightly now that the armor wasn't required. I watched her, feeling that familiar pull in my chest, the gravity that had nothing to do with mentorship and everything to do with the woman standing in the silhouette of the sunset. "We did it," I said, my voice quiet. "They backed down." "They retreated," Kaya corrected, turning to face me. "There is a difference. They didn't change their minds, Emily. They just recalculated the risk." She walked over to the small wine fridge in the corner, but she didn't reach for a Grand Cru. She pulled out a simple, unlabeled bottle of Pinot Noir. She poured 2 glasses, her movements slow, deliberate. "They're just waiting for the next stumble, or for me to look at you a second too long." I took the glass she offered. "So we have to be perfect. I can be perfect." "No," Kaya said, shaking her head. "That's the trap. Don't you see? We won the right to stay in the cage. As long as we are here, we are owned by them." She took a sip, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim of the glass. "I can't teach you anymore, Emily. Not here. Because every time I touch your arm, I'm risking your career. Every moment of connection hands ammunition to men like Marcus." The truth of it settled over me, heavy and suffocating. She was right. We had saved the mentorship, but in doing so, we had solidified the walls between us. The intimacy of the dark cellar, the electric touch in the library, those things had to die for the professional relationship to survive. The thought made the wine taste like dust. "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling the panic rise. "I go back to being just a number? We ignore what happened?" "I don't think I can do that," Kaya admitted, her voice dropping to that rough silk texture that haunted my sleep. I don't think I can watch you from a distance and pretend I don't know the weight of your potential. She set her glass down on the desk, right next to her nameplate. That's why I'm leaving. The world tilted on its axis. What? I submitted my resignation while you were decanting the mouton, she said calmly, as if she were discussing the weather. It's effective immediately. You quit? But the Institute is your life. You built this program. I built a monument to other people's wine, she corrected. I've spent 15 years judging what other people create. I've spent 15 years wearing suits and playing politics and terrified that one day my palate would slip. She walked around the desk, closing the distance between us. I'm tired of the sterile air, Emily. I'm tired of wine that tastes like money. I want to make wine that tastes like earth. I want dirt under my fingernails. I want to feel the rain, not just smell it in the glass. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a set of keys. They were old, brass, attached to a simple leather tag. I bought a property in the Anderson Valley 6 months ago. It's a wreck. The vines are overgrown, the soil is difficult, and the house is falling down. It's a risk. It's quiet. It's real. She held the keys out, but she didn't give them to me. She just let them catch the light. I'm going there to start my own label. Authentic methods. No chemicals, no corporate boards, no pretension. Just the fruit and the truth. She paused, her gaze searching my face, unflinching and vulnerable all at once. But I can't do it alone. I need a nose that can smell rain before it falls. I need a palate that understands structure better than I do. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm. You want me to be your student? I have enough students, Kaya said softly. I don't want a subordinate. I want a partner. The word hung in the air, charged and terrifying. Partner. It meant the end of the hierarchy. It meant the end of the protection the Institute offered. It meant walking away from the most prestigious certification in the world to farm dirt in the middle of nowhere. If you stay here, Kaya said, you will be a master sommelier in 3 years. You will have a safe, lucrative career. You will be respected. She took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the sandalwood and the promise of rain. If you come with me, you will be tired. You will be broke. You will work harder than you ever have in your life. And, I whispered, and you will be free, she finished. And we will be us. I looked at the glass walls of the office, at the city below that looked like a circuit board of cold light. Then I looked at Kaya. I saw the fatigue around her eyes, but I also saw the spark that had been missing, the excitement of a new vintage, the tension of the unknown. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about my rent or my resume. I thought about the feeling of her hand on my face in the library. I thought about the truth we found in the dark. I reached out and took the keys from her hand. The brass was warm from her skin. I look terrible in a suit anyway, I said. Kaya smiled, and this time, it was real. It reached her eyes, crinkling the corners, transforming her face from a monument into a woman. Let's go, she said. She left her nameplate on the desk. She left the 1945 mouton in the decanter. We walked out of the glass office, down the long hallway, and into the elevator. When the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the Institute, I didn't feel like I was falling. I felt like I was finally, for the first time, breathing fresh air. The descent was silent, but the space between us was loud with everything that was about to begin. The Anderson Valley doesn't smell like money. It smells of sage, dry dust, and cooling heat. 6 months ago, my hands were stained with a $5,000 mistake and the fear of ruin. Today, they are stained with the purple bruise of grape skins and the honest dirt of the harvest. The transition wasn't graceful. We didn't glide into this life. We clawed our way into it. The vines here were wild, the soil stubborn, and the days were long enough to break anyone who didn't love the ache of it. But we didn't break. We bent, like the vines seeking the sun, and we grew into something stronger, something with roots. The first harvest is finally in. It is small, barely enough to fill a few French oak barrels, but it is ours. There is no board of directors to taste it. There is no scorecard. There is just the fruit, stripped of pretense, fermenting in the dark of the barn we converted into a cellar. The work has changed us. My skin is rougher, my muscles tighter, and the constant low-level anxiety of the Institute has been replaced by a deep physical exhaustion that feels like peace. It was twilight when we finally stopped. The sun was dipping below the ridge, painting the valley in shades of bruised plum and gold. We sat on the porch of the farmhouse, the wood rough against our backs, a single bottle of local Pinot Noir open between us. It wasn't a Grand Cru. It was young, a little nervous, but it had a pulse. Kaya looked different here. The architectural suits were gone, replaced by denim and linen that softened the sharp lines of her authority. Her hair was loose, tangled by the wind, and there was a smear of earth on her cheekbone that made her look devastatingly human. She was swirling her glass, watching the light catch the liquid, but her mind was clearly somewhere else. "You know," she said, her voice low, blending with the sound of the crickets rising in the tall grass. "I lied to you." I looked at her, the exhaustion of the day momentarily forgotten. "About the soil acidity? Because I knew that north block was tighter than you said." She laughed, a sound that was free and unpracticed. "No. About why I saved you that day in the tasting room." She turned to face me, setting the glass down on the weathered railing. The distance between us, usually filled with the tension of work and propriety, felt suddenly charged with something else. "I didn't save you because you identified the cork taint," she confessed, her eyes locking onto mine, stripping away the last of the barriers. "I saved you because of how you looked when the bottle shattered." "I looked terrified," I said. "You looked devastated," she corrected. "Not because you were afraid of losing your job, but because you were heartbroken that the wine was wasted. You cared more about the art than the consequence. In 15 years of watching people posture and pretend, I had never seen anything so honest." She leaned closer, the scent of sage and skin overwhelming the wine. "I fell in love with you in that silence, Emily, before you even spoke." The air shifted. The tension that had been a low hum for months suddenly spiked into a high, clear note. The harvest was done. The work was finished. There was nothing left to distract us. "Kaya," I breathed, the name feeling heavy on my tongue. She didn't hesitate this time. There were no library doors to open, no executives to interrupt. She reached out, her hand finding the nape of my neck, her fingers tangling in my hair with a possessive, deliberate weight that grounded me instantly. The look in her eyes was dark, dilated, focused entirely on the shape of my mouth. "Come here," she whispered. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision of months of restraint, a sudden release of all the tension we had bottled up in the dark. It had the texture of velvet and the grip of a vintage that refuses to let go. Her mouth was warm, demanding, tasting of wine and the long day's heat. I felt the precise, unflinching intent in her touch as her other hand slid down my spine, pulling me flush against her. It was a claiming that went deeper than any certification. I melted into the contact, the rough wood of the porch railing pressing against my back, the cool evening air against my skin, and the overwhelming, intoxicating heat of her body shielding me from the coming night. It was a surrender, absolute and terrifyingly sweet, a sensory overload that made the rest of the world fade into gray. The sun finally slipped behind the ridge, leaving us silhouetted against the darkening vines, the distance between us closed for good. The worst mistake of my career had destroyed a bottle, but it had uncorked a life I never knew I wanted. Sometimes, you have to shatter the glass to taste what's real. If you've ever risked it all for a feeling you couldn't name, subscribe for more stories. Tell me in the comments, would you have walked away?